Pittsburgh drivers love to complain about potholes and bad roads, and turns out we've got good reason to. Pennsylvania has the 15th worst roads in the country, according to a study by Consumer Affairs.
If you're a local or business traveler of Western Pennsylvania, odds are you have noticed that our roads, well, they are pretty terrible. But one particular highway that connects to Route 76, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Route 70 to West Virginia, and Route 66 to the north, is often the cause of serious concerns to travelers, especially when you're attempting to gain access to Route 30 going towards downtown Greensburg. The road is 119 north, and the last portion of this roadway is an atrocious debacle of a nightmare before connecting you to Route 30. This section of highway runs through the town of Youngwood, Pennsylvania, the topic of our conversation today. If you have ever experienced this roadway, odds are your expectations of life have decreased dramatically. The views while traveling often mirror this one, while sitting in a stalemate traffic, waiting to get past never-ending road construction that has been close to finish, but then restarted several times over the past decade. Nobody seems to know why this road is completely done, then torn into smithereens over and over again, seemingly to restart where they left off to replace the same gas line they did 5 years ago. Or after the gas line is complete, a new water line construction is set to begin the following month. But before this never-ending onslaught of road construction was a daily nightmare for anyone who began their morning 30 minutes early to arrive at work on time, there was another way to travel through Youngwood to Greensburg, probably a quicker way. Over 100 years ago, with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Railroad and trolley car system. Let's take a look today at the town of never-ending construction, and a town chock full of history and copyright-protected museums. In my travels, the only town to not want their history told but kept a secret. Seriously, nobody in this town would talk to me about anything. It was like an underground serial secret of exclusivity. It was easier to gain access to film the Flight 93 memorial than it was to gain access to anything of storytelling substance in this town. Like a brick wall was taken from the side streets and placed upon any media broadcasters who wanted to tell this story. This town of barely built roadways and never-ending construction is the town known as Youngwood, Pennsylvania. From the time of the building of the southwest branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad until 1900, the surrounding country was farm and timberland. A large portion of this land, located on both sides of the railroad tracks, was owned by the John Young and the James Woods family of Greensburg, hence the name Youngwood, which was given first to the railroad station and later the borough. The land north of what is now Depot Street and west of what is 4th Street was owned by the man named Henry Strobel. Prior to 1902, the entire area of Youngwood was part of Hempfield Township. In 1899, a land company known as the Young Gross Land Company was formed by Mr. E.M. Gross, one of the members of the land company who purchased the Young and Woods farms, together with that of David Heiberger, which adjoined these farms. Part of this land was bought by the Pennsylvania Railroad for railroad yards. In 1900, the company laid out lots on both sides of 4th Street, extending on the west side of the yards. About the same time, Henry Strobel laid his land out in lots. All these lots were placed for sale in 1901. Owing to a disagreement between Henry Strobel and the land company, the lots were laid out in different dimensions. This disagreement accounts for the irregularity of 5th and 6th Streets, where they join Depot Street. With the sale of the lots came the building of homes. At the close of the year of 1901, 75 homes had been erected. One must bear in mind that even before 1901, there were homes and other buildings in existence. In 1901, L.L. Lowe and Charles Haller entered into the contracting business. This firm was known as Lowe and Haller. The large lumber yard built by them stood on North 3rd Street. With lumber now available, houses began to spring up almost overnight. For years, the town was known as a railroad town. It seems that was the case even before there was a town here. There was a railroad known as the Southwest Branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad. There was a small frame passenger station and freight station on the east side of the tracks. At the intersection of the Southwest and Sewickley branches, John Scott served as passenger and freight agent. In 1900, tracks were laid from Youngwood to Fosterville, thence to the county home of Greensburg. At this time, the weigh scales located at the north end of the yards were built. These were opened for traffic on October 25, 1900. Early in 1902, the Pennsylvania Railroad built a new brick passenger station and a 6-room office building. All these buildings were located on the west side of the tracks. The office building was then demolished in the late 1940s. In 1916, the Ellis Building was purchased by the Pennsylvania Railroad to be used for a YMCA. At this time, Youngwood was a teeming railroad center and the YMCA was essential. Under the leadership of such men as Michael Hughes, Elmore Dellett, Crosby Matthews, and Del Dean, the physical needs of the men were taken care of. Although prior to 1916, there was no YMCA organization in Youngwood, and what would these young men do without a village of people trying to get their workout on? But in 1902, the Everson branch of the YMCA was transferred to Youngwood. F.H. Belden was the first superintendent, and the meetings were held in the various churches surrounding the area. Today, Youngwood is without passenger train service, but don't worry, there was a time when passenger service was adequate. There were 4 round trips daily from Uniontown to Pittsburgh, and 3 round trips daily on the Sewickley branch. In 1902, Youngwood was incorporated into a borough. On November 10th, 1902, the first election for borough officers was conducted. The results of the election were Burgess and Henry Strobel were elected as councilmen. Thomas Bryan, policeman. One of the first tasks of this group of men was to enact some laws or ordinances. The following were among the first enacted: an ordinance establishing streets and sidewalks along Youngwood and into Greensburg. In 1901, the streetcar tracks were laid. West Penn ran a car every half hour between Youngwood and Greensburg. Later, this service was extended to Scottdale to accommodate industry means. In 1903, the West Penn Power Company furnished light for the citizens of the town. In the same year, the Fayette Gas Company furnished gas for heat and light. In 1905, the first telephone exchange was installed in the Fiscus and Ridley store. At this time, about 12 telephones were in the town. Ethel Weinman was the first telephone operator, and other utilities and improvements came rapidly. Sewers were laid, streets were paved, and sidewalks were laid, with Robert Love erecting a large brick building on the corner of Depot and 4th Streets. During the 1940s, this housed the Bayer Pharmacy, which since has moved several times, a barber shop, the Lion's Den, and Nellie's Pastry Shop, along with a number of offices and several apartments. Thus, from its humble beginnings, the town has grown and prospered. It has nurtured outstanding men and women. It has participated in civic, state, and national enterprises. Mr. F.W. Robertshaw, the superintendent of the Mansfield Manufacturing Company in Pittsburgh, made for the use of his own household the first Robertshaw thermostat. It was known that when heat was applied to the element, it expands, but different elements expand in a greater or lesser degree. No one had put this principle into practical use, generally in the field of heat regulation. That was until Mr. Robertshaw put a carbon rod in a copper tube and used this thermocouple to regulate automatically the flow of gas through a gas valve. he installed this device on his own hot water heater. Thus was started the company which is now known as the Robertshaw Thermostat division of the Robertshaw Fulton Controls Company. In 1907, an office was opened in Pittsburgh, and the company operated under the name of the House Services Utilities Manufacturing Company, with Mr. G.A. Robertshaw and Mr. Lincoln Robertshaw as managers. The name of the company was later changed to the Robertshaw Manufacturing Company, and their headquarters was located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The 2,000 square foot floor space in this building soon became too small for the expanding business, and in 1914 the company moved to its location in Youngwood, and in the same year the company was incorporated. When the business and industrial thermostats development into volume about 1920, the company entered the range oven field. With demand of the new product at a high level, the Robertshaw Manufacturing Company devoted itself exclusively to the manufacture of thermostats. In 1922, the name was changed to Robertshaw Thermostat Company. During the war years from 1941 to 1945, all the facilities of the company were converted to the manufacturing of the material for the armed services, shells and boosters for the use of ground forces, and air position indicators and actuators for the air forces were manufactured at the Youngwood plant. In order to handle explosives, it was necessary to form a new company, the Paragon Manufacturing Company, and in 1943, a plant was built at New Derry, Pennsylvania. Hand grenade fuses were produced at this plant. With the end of hostilities in 1945, the company quickly converted to peacetime production of thermostats. Not to forget also, before this in 1940, a permanent mold foundry was set at the Scottdale division of the Robertshaw Thermostat Company. In 1948, the executive offices of the Robertshaw Fulton Controls Company were moved to the Robertshaw building located at 110 East Otterman Street in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, with the Robertshaw Thermostat division with plants at Youngwood, Pennsylvania and Scottdale, Pennsylvania, were placed under the direction of Mr. G.P. Grace, vice president of the company. The Robertshaw Thermostat division of Robertshaw's Fulton Controls Company was then housed in several buildings. The floor space for manufacturing operations increased from 2,000 square feet to more than 200,000 square feet. Thus, from a modest beginning in 1899, Robertshaw Thermostat Company has grown steadily and is now generally recognized to be the world's largest producer of thermostats, hotel, restaurant, and home cooking appliances. In the spring of the year of 1903, the men organized the Youngwood Hose Company, later called the Youngwood Volunteer Hose Company. Joseph asked the council to have the hose company conjoin a meeting place in the borough building and to purchase firefighting equipment. The idea was accepted by the council and the meetings were held in the carriage house. The council purchased 400 feet of new hose and a secondary hand hose cart. In later years, the organization received another hose cart and a ladder truck, which was drawn by hand. In 1924, the company was able to purchase a Seagrave truck, in 1925 a Marmon truck, and in 1937 an International truck. The idea of a booster club was first conceived in 1943 by several athletic-minded citizens of Youngwood, among whom were Lawrence Zink, Ralph Kiggins, Thomas Kane, and William Gasper. This group carried on for the next few years, devoting its efforts to boosting the high school football team exclusively. Finally, it was decided that there was a definite need for a booster club on a larger scale and capable of covering all sports. With this in mind, a new booster club was organized in 1945 with the following office elected: Earl Hutto, president; Paul Mao, vice president; William Gasper, secretary, and Paul Weinman as treasurer. This club had dedicated itself to the tasks of sponsoring civic improvements and promoting athletics for the youth in the town. With this in mind, they set out about organizing a junior basketball league for boys 8 to 16 years of age inclusive. The best equipment was made available to these boys. Qualified men were selected to manage them, and most of these boys made the high school team in the ensuing years. In the fall, a junior basketball league was formed, and with the cooperation of the school authorities, success was assured in this venture. In addition to developing talent, the townspeople were treated to some great competitive basketball. As for football, the Booster Club did not sponsor any team of its own, but it has played a great part in sponsoring the high school team. One of the most famous athletes to come out of Youngwood, Pennsylvania area was the renowned George Blanda. George Blanda, born September 17, 1927 and dying September 27, 2010, was an American football place kicker and quarterback who played professionally in the American Football League and National Football League. Blanda played 26 years as a professional football player, the most in the sport's history, and had scored more points than anyone in history at the time of his retirement. Blanda retired from football in August of 1976, the oldest player to have ever played at the age of 48. One of only 2 players to play in 4 different decades, the other being John Carney. He holds the record for most extra points made, 943, and attempted, 959. During his career, George played under head coaches with such great names as Bear Bryant, George Hallis, Clem Crow, Lou Rimkus, Wally Lem, Pop Ivy, Sammy Baugh, Hugh Taylor, John Roush, and the late and great John Madden. U.S. Route 119 in Blanda's hometown of Youngwood, Pennsylvania, was renamed George Blanda Boulevard in 1985. In 1999, Blanda was ranked number 98 on the Sporting News list of 100 greatest football players. Blanda was the first ever recorded fantasy football draft pick when the game was first created in 1962 by the Greater Oakland Professional Pigskin Procrastinators League. I had the opportunity to hear firsthand of all of George Blanda's greatness growing up, as my neighbor was his nephew, though we seemingly never got to see George, or could I confirm this story to be at any rate evidence fact. But for this story's sake, I too brushed the shoulders of the local man who redefined this miracle of a detour town known as Youngwood, Pennsylvania. In 1952, press release states that, "This is Youngwood. We are growing fast and will continue to grow. What lies ahead in the next 50 years, we do not know. Many of us will have passed on, and our children and our children's children will carry on the first traditions that have been set in place in our first 50 years." Even with this certain optimism, Youngwood has only garnished minimal recognition and has blandly become known as the avenue towards faster travels once you leave its city limits. I'm Steve with Exploring the American Frontier, and if you like this video, please be sure to share, like, and subscribe for more fantastic history videos like this one. Thanks, guys.